My name is Karen Nichols, and I'm a member of Tapestry, a Unitarian Universalist congregation. We are a liberal faith community and who are pleased to host this powerful performance. I am happy to introduce to you, though most of you are very familiar with her current and prior work, including the 2017 presentation of Seven, which was also hosted by us at Tapestry, the director of today's performance, Cece Sloan. Can you please silence your mobile devices? And please note that we are now going to begin the recording. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Cece Sloan. Welcome to Tapestry, a Unitarian Universalist congregation in Lake Forest, California. We deeply thank the Tapestry Women's Rights Action Group and the congregation for enabling us to take part in this collaborative reading of the stories of 10 individuals from the documentary book, Focus on Abortion. Americans Share Their Stories. Interviews and photographs by Rosalind Banish of San Francisco, California. Together, we will bring to you the important voices in the conversation, those who have experienced abortion. We come from diverse generations and socioeconomic situations. We will say words like unwanted pregnancy, stigma, vulnerability, reproductive justice, accessibility, guilt and shame, and ultimately healing and healthcare. Our stories, and I quote from the book, have the potential to mitigate the profound stigma that surrounds abortion. Few people personally know or talk about their abortions. So you'll be surprised to learn that 1 out of 4 women in the US will have an abortion during their reproductive years. So now I turn to our readers, Liz, Grace, Marion, Sharon, Carrie, Julia, Charles, Carol, David, and Carol Wheeler. They will open their narratives with the name of the person whose complex thoughts and narratives and feelings they represent. And you will see the photographs as taken by Rosalind Banish, the interviewer. Sometimes alone and with trepidation, the authentic storytellers found their voices to tell their stories about abortion at a time when stigma and silence weighed heavily in our society and still do. We hope the information you hear today will spark further solidarity for a woman's right to choose. Thank you so much. And now, Focus on Abortion.
Jennifer. I think my parents wanted me to be a good homemaker. Certainly, they didn't want me having sex before marriage. That being said, I was the oldest virgin I knew. I was 19, which even in those times was pretty old. Sex was never discussed in our household growing up. I grew up in an upper middle class family in Connecticut, and I never wanted for anything. I went to Miss Porter's girls' school, which even today is still around as one of the few women's boarding schools. I was there 66 to 69, and we even had tea pouring classes back then. My abortion story happened in New York. I think it was 78 or 79. I got pregnant by a guy. We weren't even seriously dating. I mean, this was not the man I was going to spend the rest of my life with. And I knew having a baby would drastically change my life. There was no question of what I was going to do. Getting an abortion in New York wasn't difficult. I remember sitting in the hospital waiting room, looking at all these women and thinking, wow, this is a serious scene going on. Afterwards, I went out with some friends. I thought, sure, life goes on. I just had an abortion. I had just had an abortion. It was a life-changing event in both directions. I never felt guilty. I was just simply glad that I had the choice to have my life go on. Around the time of my abortion, I met the man that I would marry. We had 3 sons. It was always important to me, raising my boys, that they really became empathetic and caring young men and treated their partners with respect and equality in the relationship. And it's been wonderful as girlfriends and women, and now their wives, have said what compassionate, bright, empathetic young men they turned out to be. With the Me Too movement, I think it's wrong to only focus on women and girls. I think we need to focus on boys and men and how we raise our boys into men. Last Thanksgiving, I had 2 of the boys and their wives over for dinner, and I was talking to them about participating in this book project. And I said, I don't really feel like I have a story to tell. My youngest son in particular has always been very supportive, and he said, but Mom, that is your story. It could have been so very different. He knows that this is an important issue for me. When he was 9 or 10, we traveled back to Washington, D.C. together to go to a pro-choice rally. Even then, he understood that if women did not have a choice, then we're not really living in a democracy. I think that what's important is to take the stigma away from abortion by showing people that it's not just teenagers that have abortion, it's people from all walks and ages of life. I have never been of the opinion that abortion is just a form of birth control or that young women are stupid. Abortion is a serious, thoughtful decision, and I can't imagine that we wouldn't have that choice or that right. After all, mistakes happen, and just because you made one mistake doesn't mean that the whole rest of your life should be a mistake because you've been forced to have an unwanted child. It's just something that if you have to, it should be an option. Nobody wants to have an abortion. I do think that the young women who've always had access to abortion really need to get on board here, because we could seriously lose this right. We could lose that choice. And certainly, it cannot be something that's decided by people, men, sitting in courtrooms. Thank you.
Susan, I don't feel shame about my abortion. It's a woman's right, and I am a feminist. I think sharing my experience is important because it might help other women feel not so alone. And I hope that sharing abortion stories will help normalize what is our right to our own bodies and to make decisions about our own bodies. Also, I believe sharing our stories is key to bring about change. I've always been very open about my abortion and shared my story with my close women friends and my daughter when she became sexual, and of course my husband before we married. I was about 24 years old. I had just graduated from the university and got my first teaching job. Then, by summer, I wanted an adventure. I had a girlfriend who moved to Hawaii and had a job there. And that sounded like paradise to me. So off I went. I moved to Hawaii. I quickly met a man there and fell in love. We started a sexual relationship, and I had birth control pills, but they soon ran out. So I used foam and gel, and sometimes condoms, but not always. We just thought everything would be okay, but apparently we weren't thinking clearly. 6 months later, I was pregnant. It was November 1967, and I didn't know what to do. I panicked. So I called a friend who had helped a friend go to Washington, D.C. to get an abortion. I called the doctor's name that he gave me, and I made an appointment. I flew to Washington, D.C. alone. I still don't know where I got the money for the plane ticket and the abortion. But the next morning, I went alone again to the doctor's office. Once there, I was with several young women in the waiting room, all waiting for their abortions. When it was my turn, I thought, well, I should feel safe. He is a real doctor with a real examining table, but he then proceeded to do a D&C without anesthesia. It was horrible how painful it was. And when it was over, he just handed me a bottle of antibiotics and said, start taking these right away. And then he just coldly dismissed me like it was nothing. All he wanted was his money. And then I stopped and I thought, well, at least I was safe and I didn't hurt my chances for having a future pregnancy or pregnancies. So I did get married to my boyfriend, and we were married for 7 years until he fell in love with someone else, a younger woman, and we divorced. I was 29 at the time. Eventually, I remarried, and we had a daughter and now a granddaughter. Did I breeze through my abortion? I think I just stuffed the trauma so I could move on. That's what I did. I just wanted to move on. I didn't grow up under the most wonderful circumstances. I learned to just march forward and stuff my feelings and be strong. No, I grieved my abortion many times, but I've left it behind and moved on. I didn't stop growing, and I didn't stop living my life, and I didn't stop feeling joy. Looking back, I only wish that my abortion had been legal, as in after Roe versus Wade, 1973. Thank you.
Erica, when I think about my mother, I picture this young girl, 16, getting pregnant and all the things that happened to her, like abuse. Her past helped me understand myself. So when I was asked to tell my abortion story, it just resonated with me, and I said yes. Growing up, I was determined that when I had kids, I would stay at home and not leave them with anybody. I needed to be present for them, to protect them. In college, I became a Christian. We had very staunch beliefs. Sex before marriage was wrong, abortion was wrong, homosexuality is a sin as well. It was during that time that I met my now ex-husband. I was 20. But by the time of my abortion, I had been married for 9 years. We had been through 14 moves before my daughter was 8 years old. Eventually, we were living in our van in a Walmart parking lot, and feeding our kids was a difficult thing to do. So we moved in with my mom. I got a job with Child Protective Services as a caseworker, and we got our own house. For the first time, we were financially stable. And that's when I started to question God. Up until that point, I had been making decisions based on, what does God want me to do? Not, what does Erica want me to do? I wanted to make decisions that were in line with my conscience, but I was an emotional wreck. And instead of standing up and facing everything, I ended up having an affair. When my husband found out, I forced him to move out of the house and became unraveled. I started going to clubs and I met a younger man. It was just an escape from the reality I was living. One time, literally one time, we had unprotected sex and I got pregnant. He assumed I was going to have an abortion. He said he was never going to be part of a baby's life. I wavered as to what to do. I was thinking, Erica, you've got 4 kids. You just got financially stable. You're finally able to provide for them. You know you cannot take care of one more child. But emotionally, I was thinking, I love children. I love babies. I can do this. When my ex-husband found out, he even told me he would help me raise the child, even though we weren't together. I felt everybody was trying to give me solutions so that I could have this baby. But in my mind, they weren't real solutions. I kept hearing the words of the man who got me pregnant. If you have this baby, I will not be a part of its life. Because my own biological dad was minimally present in my own life growing up, I knew what that was like. Also, a lot of the kids I worked with in my job had no father figure whatever. I figured no child deserves that start in life. Finally, my rational side came out. I was able to choose what I thought was best for me and what is best for my children. I also thought about the fetus who would become a baby and what kind of life that baby would have. The man who got me pregnant took me to the abortion clinic and paid for it. That was 5 years ago. The Erica I am today isn't the scared one running away from her problems by having an affair. It is the Erica who believes in honesty and transparency, and in the fact that we don't always make beautiful choices, but we can learn from them and grow and become our authentic selves. I think sharing our stories can leads to discovering who we are. It took me losing myself to discover what my beliefs and values really are. Thank you.
Ariana, it's kind of a cliche, but my children are a part of me. They need me. They give me purpose. They are everything to me. I had my daughter when I was 26, and she's 4 years old now. She changed my life completely. Her name is Phoenix. That is rebirth, resurrection. She's one reason why I'm an activist and an advocate for abortion. I want a world where my daughter can be happy being herself, loving herself, growing and nurturing herself, and have the right tools to do so. I also have 3 wonderful sons, ages 15, 10, and 2. My grandmother always taught me to be about my business. I made errors in my life partying all the time. That aggravated her so much. She would get on me for not taking care of what I was supposed to. And now that I'm trying to keep my life together, I see exactly what she was talking about. You know, I just didn't have the education or the guidance to make the right decisions. When I had my first baby at 16, we stopped going to church because of the side eyes, the whispering, the talking. In the Black community, the church is prominent. We shun each other as opposed to being open and trying to deal with our issues. I felt so bad for my grandmother because she loved that church. And I always felt guilty about that because she still pays her tithes there, but she just doesn't go. I had a few abortions in the past. My grandmother helped me get my first one because I was just 17 and I already had a son. I knew at that time I didn't want any more kids out of wedlock. My last abortion was last year. I've dealt with a lot of regret over the years. I just wish I could do my 20s over again. I was reckless with my life and my body. I was not there for my children like I should have been. The regret goes on and has a lot to do with my abortions. Because after the first abortion, I just gave up on my faith and where I was trying to go. Today, I'm still a very spiritual person, but my abortions have stuck with me. And that's why I am fighting now. Because my daughter is going to have to make these decisions. She may get pregnant, she may not. She may have an abortion, she may not. Who knows? I just want her to know the things that happened to me and the decisions that I made. I would like my daughter to live in a world where society does not tear her down and beat her up for being her and making the decisions that she's going to have to make. If we take away a woman's right to 1, get an abortion, and 2, birth control, we take away a person's control over their life. Everybody should have control over their life. I have young girls and women reaching out to me for advice on where to get an abortion and how to move forward. If I can help another 16 or 17-year-old, just one, that would be my dream. I don't want it to just be my daughter. Every young girl needs a support system at that critical point in their life. Some pretty big decisions to make on your own. These girls need to know they have somebody to talk to and they need to speak up. Don't bottle up your feelings and go it alone, because that's what's going to hurt you the most. Thank you.
Ava. My mother is ultimately how I got into this field. I was 10 years old and my mother got pregnant. Our physician told her he could send her to a gynecologist who could do an abortion. It wouldn't be legal, but it would be safe. The gynecologist would charge $1,000 for taking a profound risk. That was a huge amount of money in 1962. My parents didn't have any money. We lived in a housing project and we were broke. Because there was not enough money to pay for a safe, physician-induced illegal abortion, she had a self-induced abortion. She took a blunt plastic instrument and put it up her vagina through her cervix without anesthetic. She popped the amniotic sac. She labored and delivered into the toilet and then got very sick. Afterwards, my mom got depressed, my dad got sad and overwhelmed. It was really just a very tough time in our family. In my late teens, my mom told me that my grandmother had had an abortion on the kitchen table by the same doctor who later delivered me. When I was a kid, we used to donate old clothes to Planned Parenthood thrift store. That's where my mother always took me, and she explained the importance of birth control. When I was still a student at San Diego State, I worked for Planned Parenthood. After 10 years, I went into private practice as an individual adult psychotherapist. My niche is post-abortion counseling. Often people ask me how I could have spent my career working with such an intense subject as abortion. I tell them it's fabulous and it's such fun work. I've never had an abortion. The first time I had sex, I was 17. The man pulled out a condom and put it on, thankfully, because I was too stupid and drunk, which is so normal. Then I said to my parents, I think I should get some birth control. My mother took me to the clinic. The doctor popped in an IUD and I had it for 10 years. When I see men as clients, I ask them if they've been involved in any pregnancies that they know of. Often they've never thought about the concept of having been involved in any pregnancies. Sometimes they say, yeah, I got a girl pregnant in college and she had an abortion. I ask, how is that for you? And often it's fine. But sometimes it's like, I've carried that around and felt guilty about how I treated that girl. Or I wish I could have been able to provide at the time, but we both knew we couldn't do it. In my practice, I see people who are struggling after an abortion, which really is only about 10 to 15% of those people who have abortions. About a quarter of the people who struggle after an abortion are grieving a loss that was precipitated by becoming pregnant when they didn't mean to. The loss is almost never what the anti-choice people say it is. It's almost never, "I killed my baby." For the most part, the loss is other things. It can be the loss of innocence. There's the realization that sex is fun, but sex has real consequences that I have to face now. And then there's the grief. About a quarter of my clients haven't dealt with their grief. I help my clients grieve. Many people having difficulty after an abortion can't grieve that grief. Why not? Because we live in a culture where almost no one has any idea how to grieve. They're terrified of grief. The other 3/4 of my clients are coping with the anxiety of finding out they were pregnant when they didn't mean to be. Added to that anxiety is figuring out how to pay for it, the anxiety of going to a clinic, maybe crossing a picket line full of people screaming at you that abortion is physically dangerous, which is completely untrue, the fear that you're going to die. All this anxiety, even though abortion is a completely safe procedure. It's brief, it's often pain-free, although yes, it can be painful. When it's done, you might feel total relief, or you might not. Afterwards, some women are distressed. They're pro-choice, they wanted the abortion, they had it, yet they feel a profound loss. We all carry boxes inside of us where old, unaddressed anxieties are locked tightly away. Finding out you're pregnant when you don't want to be often brings up visceral memories that are disturbing and distressing. I want to help my clients understand and work through it. In our sessions, we get to the real issue and what that is in their life and what they've been tripping and stumbling over. I get lovely, lovely results. It is amazing how much people can heal if you're willing to take the risk of coming to therapy. People's capacity to heal is profound. People who are struggling after an abortion, men or women, need to know this is all healable. You don't have to suffer your whole life with guilt or regret. Thank you.
Heather. I had the good fortune to be born into a loving family with wonderful values. My folks believed everyone should be treated with dignity and respect, and that we had an obligation to make this a better world. In 1964, I went to Mississippi for the Freedom Summer Project. The project was designed because poor Black people in Mississippi were living in a state of terror. My Mississippi summer taught me to trust and value the wisdom of local people who know what they want. It also told me that sometimes there's unjust authority and you need to stand up to unjust laws and challenge them, even at the risk of your own personal sacrifice. In general, in my life, imperfectly, I try to do the right thing. In 1964, there wasn't really an acknowledged women's movement, but women were certainly facing discriminatory practices. One example. A friend of mine was raped at night in her bed in off-campus housing, and we went with her to the Student Health Center. She was given a lecture on her promiscuity and told that student health didn't cover gynecological exams. In 1965, a friend of mine said his sister, a grad student, was pregnant and nearly suicidal. She was not ready to have a baby. She wanted an abortion. For my friend's sister, I found a great doctor through the Medical Committee for Human Rights, which was the medical arm of the civil rights movement. I made the connection between the doctor and my friend, and the procedure was successful. I didn't really think more about it, and I didn't discuss it, but word spread. Then someone else called, and someone else called. I realized I'd better set up a system. I lived in the dormitory, and when people phoned up, they were told to ask for Jane. This was the beginning of the Jane service. Then the doctor died. People were still calling, seeking an abortion. Again, I did a search, and I found another provider named Mike. At the start of the Jane service, all of the women getting abortions were students. Later, it spread out to the greater Chicago area and then to other campuses in the Midwest. As the Jane population started to change, the people coming to Jane were more often poor and didn't have the money to travel where abortions were legal. By 1968, I had graduated. I had married, expecting my first child, and working full-time. I was still trying to get a graduate degree and could no longer handle the load of people coming through Jane. That's when I recruited volunteers. After I left, the volunteers set up a more formal system. First of all, they were helping Mike with the abortions. There were so many women coming through, he couldn't do it all alone. Mike taught these volunteers at Jane how to do abortions. During that time, the women of Jane performed 11,000 abortions themselves. I don't know if the people who volunteered at Jane were fearless. I do think they were courageous. They were creative and they were dedicated. Over the years, I have continued to stay involved in social justice issues. From the civil rights and women's movements, to working against the war in Vietnam, to union organizing, electoral organizing, tax fairness, and prescription drug prices. I have been there. Everything I do keeps to the key lessons I learned early. If we organize, we can change the world. What it takes to be an organizer is you have to love people and hate injustice. The people who make change are ordinary people who do extraordinary things, not because they're more courageous, but because they decide the goal is worth the effort. Change starts to happen when we join together. Thank you.
Monty. Our first child was conceived and died at 20 weeks. We named her Faith. That was some 22 years ago. My wife and I had been married 3 years when she got pregnant. From the beginning, the pregnancy was very difficult. At our 18-week ultrasound, we were hoping to learn the baby's gender, but things were not going well. The ultrasound showed a very severe cardiac defect, and the amniotic fluid had continued to drop. I was attending medical school at the time, and the research I did revealed there were zero cases of any child surviving this condition. Our choices were to carry the child to term or near term and deliver her, then watch her suffocate. Or we could end the pregnancy earlier and suffer less. My wife couldn't bear to hold on anymore, and we knew we had to let our daughter go. My wife worked for a hospital run by the Baptist Church. We were insured by them, and we're in the process of scheduling the abortion there. However, a hospital committee decided that this was just an elective termination. They didn't look into the details that our situation was hopeless. They thought the baby had a heart defect and we didn't want to deal with it. That was far from the case. We were not allowed to have the abortion at the hospital where she worked, was insured, and where all her friends and support were. We drove the hour to Fort Worth Hospital and induced labor, and then the daughter was stillborn at 20 weeks. We went back home trying to recuperate. My wife's hospital called. The hospital was self-insured, so they covered their employees' medical costs as long as the procedure was done at their own facility. But since we went outside, we were expected to cover the costs. That set me off. An attorney advised that we had a good case and gave me great advice. He said if the hospital didn't cover the expenses, that I was to call him back. He didn't solicit our business, but was there for support. And I wondered if he ever knew how much it meant to have that one sympathetic ear. Eventually, I had to put on my lab coat and stomp into the hospital CEO's office and threaten to sue before they reconvened the committee, and the chairman wisely apologized and everything was paid. People were loosely supportive. Most, though, seemed to shy away from the tragedy. When it comes to facing death and dying, a lot of people just can't do it. And through the 20 years that I've been an oncologist, I've learned that a lot of times what people need when there is a death is just to feel not alone. The one good thing about the whole bad dream was it became a bonding time for my wife and me. We became us. We were all we had. Now we have 3 boys, wonderful young men. We love them. We're proud of them. And we often think of faith. My wife supports telling our story, as it's therapeutic for her too. Abortions happen in all kinds of circumstances, and to married couples like us with planned pregnancies. You just can't judge people based on what makes you uncomfortable. You owe it to everybody to try to understand where they're coming from, comprehend the agony they're in. Honestly, I think we have more in common between pro-choice and pro-life than we have differences. You know, it would be nice to open up people's minds on all sides, because I really think we could have conversations that we're not having. We don't have to agree with each other to have a conversation. I appreciate where pro-life ideas are coming from, which is not a bad place. I just think we're going about it wrong, going about it with a lack of empathy. Thank you.
Amy. My mother came from the Philippines, and she was the first generation to come here, and eventually she brought the rest of her family over as well. She became a psychiatrist. My mother is one of the most independent, strong women I have ever met. My father was raised by a single mother from Mexico, and he became an OBGYN. When I was very young, probably about the 5th grade, someone came up to me and told me that my dad killed babies for a living. And I said, no, he delivers babies. Well, I went home and I asked him about what I had heard. My parents sat down and explained to me that people sometimes aren't ready to become parents. Depending upon their situation, abortion is an option that they have. I'm not sure I grasped the concept of abortion completely, but I did have more empathy toward it. My father would fly to Laredo on a weekend to do abortions, and the alternative week to Corpus Christi and perform abortions there as well. I saw the Laredo waiting room. It was filled with people who really needed this service. And it dawned on me that some of them just didn't have the means to raise a baby. It's strange to me that I work in reproductive rights. I believe in the right to abortion, and yet I would never talk about my own abortion. What started me telling my story was when I attended hearings in the Texas Senate in 2013. They were then in the process of passing laws to restrict the access to abortions. At the hearing, a woman spoke about how her mental health depended upon her access to abortion. If she were to get pregnant, she would not be able to take her medication, and that kept her mentally healthy. I was so in awe of this woman who could share that, and she said it in front of a bunch of people. So I spent the next 3 years of my life trying to get the courage to talk about it too. Well, there are a lot of false narratives about abortion causing depression or creating problems with mental health. Well, we know that's not true. In fact, my abortion helped me to deal with my mental health issues. When I found out I was pregnant, there was no question of whether I was going to have an abortion. It was an absolute yes. I was going to have an abortion because I believed that I would have hit rock bottom without it. Well, there are times when there's only so much a person can handle, and at that time I was barely hanging on. After the abortion, I was able to step up and take care of my dad, who had been diagnosed with a brain tumor. I got better because I had to. I like to credit my abortion with giving me the opportunity to heal myself, to find myself, and to choose the person that I was going to become and the parent I am now. That's the impetus for me to be more vocal about my own story. I don't feel threatened to talk about it. I feel like it's my duty. I keep going because I don't want to live in a world where people don't have the rights that they should have. I am inspired by those who are brave and young and fight for those rights. Thank you.
John. I was born in 1965 in Dublin, Ireland. My family was mom, dad, and 3 brothers. My parents are very religious people, not in that conservative way, but in that Jesus was a radical way. They read the Bible every day and took us to church every week. There are many wonderful things in Catholicism that are absolutely terrific. It's not just about going to Mass on Sunday. It's about living a life that tries to put into practice the principles of equality and fairness and love. The sadness, of course, is that if you listen to the bishops these days, they're so stuck in the pelvic zone. They're so focused on contraception, abortion, preoccupied with this myopic view of humans. It's a view that's built upon power and the ability to enact that power over others. In the 1980s, many of us really wanted to change the world, and we wanted to change Ireland. There was a referendum in 1983 to amend the Irish Constitution to protect and defend the right to life of the unborn. The Catholic Church used the pulpit to really put the fear of God literally into people, and the referendum passed. Quite a lot of friends of mine had become teenage moms, which meant the cycle of poverty would go on, or even be worsened once you have 1 or 2 more kids, especially if the father is not around to help. In the Republic of Ireland, I began working at the Family Planning Association, an independent group that set out to provide contraception. The Irish activist Ruth Riddick educated me about abortion and about how much the laws hurt poor women who can't exercise their autonomy because it costs money. When a woman makes a decision to have an abortion, she's following her conscience. She's doing the most Catholic thing she can do. When a woman makes a decision not to have an abortion, she's also following her conscience. I met with some doctors who were struggling as to whether to provide abortions or not. One of them said, "Catholics for choice? Is that an oxymoron?" No, it's not, because Catholic women use birth control and they have abortions at the same rates as those of other faiths or no faith. Last time I looked, there's a hell of a lot of gay, lesbian, and transgender Catholics. Last time I looked, a lot of Catholics are divorced. So don't tell me that our worldview is not shared by the majority of Catholics in the world. I'm a religious person. I'm a Catholic. I don't want someone dictating to me that I can't practice my faith as I see fit. At Catholics for Choice, we give voice to those Catholics who think and believe and act differently than the hierarchy of our church. Thank you.
Aziza. I had an abortion when I was 33. I was unemployed, but working under the table at a restaurant in Chicago, doing odd jobs, making enough to pay my rent. At a friend's wedding in Washington, D.C., I met someone. There was this whirlwind romance like you see in the movies. I was in Chicago, he was in D.C. We were just texting back and forth until I ended up going back to D.C. We used protection when we had sex, but there was that one time. Anyway, I came back to Chicago and kept going through life, trying to find a job and working when I could. I either missed my period or had some serious breast tenderness, so I thought maybe I should take a pregnancy test. I must have peed on 55 sticks. Test kept coming back positive. I didn't have health insurance, so I went to a clinic just up the street for a checkup and another pregnancy test. It came back positive. Then I called my boyfriend, the father of the pregnancy. He asked what I wanted to do. Now, historically, Black women just bear the brunt of whatever they come up against. Keep a kid, live paycheck to paycheck, go through social services, go on welfare, food stamps, all that kind of thing. Just make it work. Now, he admitted he didn't know if it was the right thing for us to bring a kid into the world. I was in turmoil. At Planned Parenthood, an abortion would cost $500. I didn't have a job and I was barely able to pay my $800 rent. I ended up going to the Stover Hospital at Cook County. An abortion there would cost only $75. Now, I could definitely afford that. By this time, I had decided to have the abortion. There was no way I was going to have a kid without having a job and being able to pay rent. Kids are expensive. I went to the hospital by myself. You're in a waiting room with 20 to 30 women at various stages of pregnancy. After the sonogram, they ask you if this is something you want to do. You sign the paperwork. Then they schedule your actual procedure. It's a public hospital and they treat you kind of like cattle. At first, we were walking single file through the nice, glistening parts of the hospital. Then we walked down all these stairs to the bowels of the hospital. We ended up in a room with 4 or 5 rows of hard metal folding chairs, maybe 5 to 6 chairs in each row, filled with women. They told us to go and take our clothes off. After you sign more paperwork, you take this pill. Once you take this pill, you can't change your mind. The pill softened the cervix so they could go in and do a suction abortion. While I was sitting in the metal chair, I wondered how I got there. Here I am, 33 years old, having an abortion and sitting on this metal chair. What decision-making skills was I not using? I had had many close brushes having unprotected sex. I thought maybe I couldn't get pregnant. Obviously, I could, because here I am, sitting on this metal chair. When it was my turn, they told me to get on the table. There were 2, 3 people in the room. I don't think I had anesthesia. When it was my turn, after the procedure, they have you sit on a chair in a little room with this huge ancient pad from like 1932 that goes from your belly button to the back of your spine. You sit there for a little longer. Finally, you put your clothes on and you talk to the outtake person. You sign more paperwork. The outtake nurse said, "If anything happens, you can always call us or come back in." I said, "You will never see me again." And she said, "Yeah, I hear that a lot." I said, "No, you will never see me again."
Hello, everyone. Well, focus on abortion. What are we asking of you today? Solidarity for women's right to choose. Welcome and thank you for being here today. We do appreciate your presence. My name is Lucy Hamilton, and I am the co-producer of the event today. This eye-opening event today, alongside Cece Sloan and this marvelous cast. Can I have another hand for these folks, please? I hope that you follow Jennifer's and Ava's advice. Let's bring our men into our focus and our conversation. As mothers, grandmothers, aunts, friends, or mentors, it is our obligation to bring our men into the fold. Look for some more stories at focusonabortion.org. We are alike, my friends, more than we are unalike.